I was terrified on my first day at the new school. Not the excited kind of nervous, the sick, hollow kind that makes your stomach hurt and your hands shake. Moving around constantly because of my dad's job had taught me to expect this feeling, to live with it like a chronic condition I'd never quite shake. I developed a survival strategy over the years. Keep your head down, sit in the back, lose yourself in your sketchbook, and count the days until the next inevitable move. Don't get attached, don't stand out, don't give anyone a reason to notice you, because being noticed meant being vulnerable. I never expected anything different from this school. I certainly never expected Zoe. Zoe was the kind of girl you couldn't help but notice, even if you actively tried not to. She was loud in that magnetic way that pulls people into orbit around her, confident without seeming like she was trying, effortlessly charismatic in a way that made teachers give her more leniency because she was spirited rather than disruptive. On my second day, I was sitting alone at lunch, hoping to be invisible, when she appeared. She dropped her tray across from me like we'd been friends for years, then immediately turned her attention to a group of guys at the next table who were mocking the way I ate my sandwich. Apparently, holding it with two hands was hilarious to them. "Hey!" Zoe's voice cut across the cafeteria noise. "Why don't you focus on your own sad lunches instead of being creeps?" The guys mumbled something and turned away. Zoe turned back to me with this smile, like she'd just done the most casual thing in the world. Like standing up for a complete stranger was simply what she did. "I'm Zoe, and you're new, obviously. What's your name?" That moment changed everything. I just didn't know it yet. Zoe made it impossibly easy to fall into her world. She noticed my art, really noticed it, not just the polite acknowledgement most people gave. She'd flip through my sketchbook and point out specific details, asking about my process, my inspiration. "You're seriously talented," she'd say. "You need to get out of your own head and let people see this." She invited me to hang out after school. Slowly, almost without me realizing it, I stopped spending all my time alone in my room with my drawings. My parents noticed the change and were thrilled. "It's so good to see you making friends," my mom said one evening, her relief palpable. I thought so too. The first red flag was Lucas. He was this genuinely sweet kid who'd been friendly to me from day one. He'd offer to carry my art supplies when I was loaded down with projects. He'd ask how I was doing, actually listening to my answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. He was kind in that rare, authentic way that's hard to find. One day, as Lucas was walking away after helping me pick up papers I'd dropped, Zoe leaned in close and whispered, "You know he's obsessed with you, right? He doesn't like that we're close. He's super jealous." After that, I started pulling away from Lucas. Every time he'd approach me, I'd remember Zoe's warning and make excuses to leave. I'd see his confused, hurt expression and feel guilty. But Zoe had said he was jealous, possessive. I believed her. God, I wish I hadn't. Zoe started borrowing things. It began innocently enough, a pencil here, an eraser there. Then it was my sketchbooks, which she'd keep for days before I'd have to ask for them back. Then she started asking for money. Her card wasn't working, she'd say. She'd pay me back tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. I didn't think much of it at first. Friends help each other out, right? But I started noticing that she never gave anything back. She stopped asking permission altogether and just started taking. A favorite pen would disappear from my bag. The special charcoal pencils my grandmother had given me would end up in Zoe's art kit. Then she started asking for help with homework. Not, "Can you explain this concept to me?" but, "Can you just do this for me real quick? I'm so swamped." And like an idiot, I did. I thought I owed her something. I thought this was what friendship cost. Things got significantly weirder when Zoe started posting my sketches online, with her name on them. The first time I saw it, I thought maybe it was a mistake. I sent her a private message. "Hey, that drawing you posted is actually mine. Can you fix the caption?" She read it immediately, but didn't respond. When I brought it up in person the next day, she rolled her eyes like I was being ridiculous. "It's just social media," she said with a dismissive laugh. "Relax, you're being so petty about this." But I wasn't being petty. Those were my drawings, my hours of work, my vision, and she was taking credit for them. When I tried to push back, tried to set boundaries, she'd get this look on her face, hurt, betrayed, like I was the one doing something wrong. The more I pulled away, the harder she pulled me back. She'd show up at my house unannounced. She'd text me constantly, dozens of messages if I didn't answer right away. Where are you? Why are you ignoring me? I thought we were friends. But if I did answer, she'd somehow turn every conversation into either a lecture about my failures or a joke at my expense. Then the lies started. Zoe told people that Lucas had tried to kiss her at a party. When I expressed doubt, Lucas had never seemed like the type to do something like that. She turned on me. "So you're choosing him over me?" she said, her voice dripping with hurt and accusation. "Wow, I really thought you were different." She started making up things about my parents too. She'd say cruel, cutting things designed to get under my skin and fester there. "Your parents don't love you the way they say they do," she'd whisper. "You're a burden to them. They're just pretending to be supportive. I can see right through it." It got in my head. Of course it did. I was young and insecure and desperate to belong somewhere, and Zoe knew exactly which buttons to push. She was everywhere, inescapable. She'd text me nonstop throughout the day and night. If I didn't answer right away, the guilt trips would start. "Are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? I'm worried about you." But if I did answer, she'd somehow turn every conversation into either a lecture about my failures or a joke at my expense. The night everything really broke was after she convinced me to skip my dad's birthday dinner. My parents had planned this nice evening out, just the three of us, to celebrate. But Zoe called me that afternoon, her voice urgent. She needed me. She was having a crisis. She couldn't be alone. Could I please come hang out with her instead? I felt terrible, but I told my parents something had come up with a friend and asked if we could reschedule Dad's birthday celebration. I could see the disappointment in their faces, but they agreed. They were just happy I had a friend who needed me. Zoe said we'd just hang out at her place, watch movies, talk. Instead, she took me to a party at someone's house. Someone I'd never met, full of people I didn't know. The second we walked in, she ditched me, just disappeared into the crowd without a word. I spent the entire evening standing awkwardly in corners, trying to look like I belonged, feeling increasingly anxious and out of place. I finally gave up and left early, walking home in the rain because I couldn't afford an Uber and was too embarrassed to call my parents. When I confronted Zoe the next day about how messed up that was, she laughed. Actually laughed. "You need to toughen up," she said. "Not everything is about you." After that, things spiraled completely out of control. Zoe started flirting with a guy I told her I liked, really liked, had liked for months. She'd touch his arm, laugh at his jokes, position herself between us whenever we tried to talk. When I called her out on it, she acted shocked. "I'm just being friendly. Are you seriously that insecure?" Then she asked me to help her cheat on a test. Not help her study, actually cheat. She wanted me to write answers on a piece of paper she could use during the exam. I was uncomfortable but felt trapped. If I said no, she'd make my life miserable. If I said yes, well, at least she'd be happy with me. We got caught. The teacher saw us passing notes and confiscated them immediately. When we were called into the office separately, Zoe denied everything. She said she had no idea what I was doing, that I must have slipped her the notes without her knowledge, that she was shocked and disappointed in me. My parents grounded me for a month. My teacher, who'd always liked me before, looked at me with such disappointment that I wanted to sink through the floor. Everyone believed Zoe's version of events, because why wouldn't they? She was charming, popular, beloved. I was the quiet new kid with a history of moving around. Zoe told everyone I was losing it. She'd whisper to mutual acquaintances, her voice full of concerned sympathy. "I'm really worried about her. I think she needs therapy. She's not safe to be around anymore." That's when Lucas tried to reach out to me again. He caught me after class one day, his expression serious. He said, "I have proof Zoe is lying about everything. Please, just let me show you." I didn't want to hear it. I was too deep in it, too tangled up in Zoe's web to see clearly. And I hated that part of myself, the part that still desperately wanted Zoe to like me, even after everything she'd done. Then, Zoe claimed I'd assaulted her. She showed up at school one Monday with bruises on her arms and a split lip. She told the principal, told the school counselor, told anyone who would listen that I'd attacked her over the weekend. She showed them text messages I'd allegedly sent threatening her, messages I had no memory of sending because I hadn't sent them. The school suspended me immediately, pending investigation. Then the police got involved, actual police, asking me questions in an interrogation room while my terrified parents sat beside me. The rumors spread like wildfire. My parents started losing clients at their business because of what people were saying about their daughter. The whispers followed me everywhere. Did you hear what she did? I always knew there was something off about her. I stopped eating. Food seemed pointless when my entire life was falling apart. I stopped drawing. The one thing that had always brought me peace now felt tainted because it had been the bait that drew me into Zoe's trap. I honestly stopped caring about anything. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had turned into this nightmare. But Lucas didn't give up. He did his own investigation, quiet and methodical. He found a girl named Emma who'd gone to Zoe's old school before she transferred to ours. Emma had the same story, the exact same story. Zoe had befriended her, isolated her, stolen from her, and ultimately destroyed her reputation with false accusations. Miss Rivera, our art teacher, found something too. She discovered Zoe's sketchbook hidden in the supply room, and inside were pages and pages of practice signatures in my handwriting. There were notes written to look like they were from me, with my speech patterns and drawing style. Zoe had been forging evidence. Then they found the security footage from the night Zoe claimed I'd attacked her. I wasn't even at the location she had specified. I'd been at home with my parents, a fact they'd confirmed, but no one had initially believed. The final piece of evidence was almost comical in its stupidity. Zoe had taken selfies of herself applying the fake bruises with makeup, probably to make sure they looked convincing. She'd just forgotten to delete them from her phone. When the truth came out, when all the evidence was laid bare and Zoe couldn't lie her way out of it anymore, they called us both into the principal's office. Zoe looked me straight in the eye, and with this eerily calm expression, she said, "I envied you. Your art, your family, your potential, everything. Watching you break was my masterpiece." Those words hit me like a physical blow. This girl I'd considered my best friend, who I'd trusted completely, had systematically destroyed my life as some kind of twisted art project. She'd studied me, learned my weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision, all because she was jealous. But what Zoe didn't know was that I had a plan. I wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction of thinking she had broken me. She'd torn me down, yes, but I was going to build myself back up, and I was going to make sure she never did this to anyone else. The minute I walked away from that final confrontation in the principal's office, I started putting my plan into action. The first thing I did was call Lucas. I needed someone who'd believe me without question, someone who'd been on my side from the beginning, even when I'd pushed him away. We met up at the park near my house, at those old wooden benches behind the playground where no one ever goes. Lucas looked worried when I showed up, kept glancing around like he expected Zoe to materialize out of thin air. I dumped everything that had happened. Zoe's confession, her cold admission that destroying me had been deliberate, calculated, intentional. Lucas's face went from concerned to genuinely angry. She actually said that breaking you was her masterpiece? I nodded, and he immediately pulled out his phone, scrolling through old messages before showing me a name and number I didn't recognize. "You need to talk to Emma," he said. Emma apparently had transferred to our school district last year after drama at her old school, drama involving Zoe. I hesitated, wondering if this could be another trap, but Lucas had never lied to me. Not once. I texted Emma right there, asking if we could meet somewhere private. She suggested the public library the next day. I agreed, even though the thought of revealing all this painful history to a complete stranger made my stomach churn. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Zoe's words in my head. Watching you break was my masterpiece, while making detailed notes in a fresh notebook I'd hidden under my mattress. I was documenting everything now. Every interaction, every lie, every manipulation I could remember. If I was going to take Zoe down, I needed to be thorough. The next day at school, I arrived at the library 20 minutes early and claimed a study room in the back. Lucas showed up first, giving me a quick side hug before sitting down. When Emma walked in, I immediately noticed how nervous she seemed, eyes darting around the room, checking behind her before closing the door. She was pretty in a quiet, understated way, with anxious hands that kept adjusting her hair. Lucas made the introductions, and for a minute we just sat there in awkward silence. Emma stared at her hands, clearly uncomfortable, until Lucas gently prompted her to share her story. What came out next felt like listening to someone narrate my own life. Emma described how Zoe had befriended her when she was new to school, made her feel special and seen, then slowly, methodically isolated her from other friends. She talked about Zoe borrowing art supplies and never returning them, asking for money with promises to pay it back that never materialized, even stealing some of Emma's paintings and posting them online as her own work. My mouth literally dropped open when Emma pulled out her phone and showed me Instagram posts from over a year ago. The artwork could have been mine, the style, the technique, the subjects. It was like looking at an alternate timeline where I was the one Zoe had targeted before. Emma's voice got really shaky when she described how Zoe had eventually turned on her, spreading rumors that Emma was obsessed with her, even filing a false stalking report with the school. No one had believed Emma's side of the story because Zoe was so convincing, so well-liked by teachers and students alike. Emma's parents had eventually transferred her to our district just to escape the situation. I sat there in complete shock, listening to this girl describe the exact same tactics, the same playbook, the same systematic destruction I'd experienced. It was like Zoe had a manual she followed with each target, refining her technique with practice. When Emma finished talking, she looked absolutely drained, like reliving it all had physically exhausted her. I thanked her for sharing. I knew how hard it must have been and promised I wouldn't let Zoe get away with doing this to anyone else. Armed with this knowledge, I headed home with a much clearer plan forming in my mind. First, I needed concrete evidence, proof that couldn't be dismissed as she said drama. I dug through my phone looking for old texts from Zoe, but discovered she'd been smart. Many of the most damning messages had mysteriously disappeared. I couldn't prove she'd deleted them, but the timing was suspicious. So I started a new approach, documenting everything in real time. I bought a small voice recorder and started keeping it in my pocket whenever I knew I'd be around Zoe or her friends. I set up automatic cloud backups of all texts and social media messages. I started a detailed journal with times, dates, exact quotes, and witnesses present. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about stopping Zoe's pattern of behavior before she could hurt someone else. The next day at school, I cautiously approached Miss Rivera, the art teacher who discovered Zoe's notebook with the forged signatures. She listened carefully as I explained what I'd learned from Emma, her face growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, she sighed heavily. I'm limited in what I can do without more concrete evidence. School protocols mean I can't directly accuse a student based on suspicions, but I can keep a closer eye on things. She paused. I have noticed some inconsistencies in Zoe's artwork submissions recently, styles that don't quite match, techniques she shouldn't have mastered yet, but I haven't had enough proof to act on my concerns. I left Miss Rivera's classroom feeling slightly better. At least one adult believed me and was paying attention. When I got home that afternoon, I decided it was time to come clean to my parents. They'd been walking on eggshells around me since the suspension, clearly unsure what to believe. terrified their daughter might actually be capable of violence. I found them in the kitchen and asked for a family meeting. Dad looked surprised, but turned off the TV while Mom closed her work laptop. I took a deep breath and started from the very beginning. Zoe's initial friendship, the gradual manipulation, the stolen artwork, the false assault claims, and finally, what I'd learned from Emma about Zoe's history. At first, they seemed skeptical. I could see it in their exchanged glances, the way they shifted uncomfortably. Mom even interrupted at one point to ask why I hadn't told them sooner, her voice tinged with hurt. I pulled out my phone and showed them Emma's social media from a year ago. Her artwork, clearly in a similar style to mine, posted under Zoe's name. Then I showed my own recent pieces that Zoe had claimed as hers. The similarities were too obvious to ignore, the pattern too clear. I watched as their expressions shifted from doubt to shock to anger. Dad started talking about calling Zoe's parents immediately, his voice rising. Mom mentioned lawyers and the school board, her hands clenched into fists. I quickly jumped in, explaining that a direct confrontation would only make Zoe more dangerous. She was smart and calculating. If we cornered her, she'd just find a more convincing way to paint me as the villain, more elaborate lies, more compelling fabrications. I convinced them to let me handle it my way, methodically building evidence while they focused on damage control for their business, which had been hemorrhaging clients because of the rumors about me. My parents reluctantly agreed, but insisted on being kept in the loop about everything. No more secrets, no more handling things alone. With my parents on board, I turned my attention to rebuilding some of the friendships I'd abandoned under Zoe's influence. This proved harder than I had expected. I texted Marcus from my biology class, asking if he wanted to partner on the upcoming lab project. His response was cold. Already found a partner. When I approached Jennifer after English class, she made an excuse about being late and practically ran away from me. The rumors about my mental breakdown, my violent tendencies, my instability, they'd spread further than I'd realized. I was radioactive, someone to be avoided. I decided to take a different approach, starting with small gestures rather than trying to force my way back into friendships. I left an encouraging note in William's locker before his big swim meet. I shared my chemistry notes with Dakota when she missed class due to a family emergency. Baby steps, but it was something. The real breakthrough came completely by accident. I was in the school bathroom during lunch period, hiding in there because I didn't want to face the cafeteria alone, when I heard voices. Zoe's voice, unmistakable and confident, along with another girl I didn't immediately recognize. I quickly ducked into a stall, not ready for any kind of confrontation. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Zoe walked in with Taylor, her apparent new best friend, the latest target. They were talking and laughing, and then Zoe casually mentioned my name. I held my breath as Zoe started talking about me, her voice dripping with contempt. She mentioned how she'd made up the whole assault story just to teach me a lesson for not appreciating her friendship enough. She laughed, actually laughed, about how easy it had been to manipulate the situation, how everyone had believed her over me. I frantically fumbled for my phone, managed to hit record, and captured about 2 minutes of Zoe, openly bad-mouthing me and bragging about her manipulation. When they finally left, my hands were shaking with a mixture of anger and vindication. I had actual proof. Her own words, her own admission. My excitement quickly faded when I did some research later and discovered that recording someone without their consent wasn't legally admissible as evidence in our state. My heart sunk. But then I realized, even if it couldn't be used in court, it could still be valuable in convincing others of the truth, especially school administrators who weren't bound by the same legal standards. What was even more disturbing was what else I'd heard in that recording. Zoe was already starting the same cycle with Taylor, borrowing things and not returning them, creating small debts,
making subtle comments designed to isolate Taylor from her other friends. I sat in that bathroom stall long after they'd left, watching history begin to repeat itself right before my eyes, knowing I needed to move faster before another person got completely destroyed.
After processing what I'd heard, I decided I needed to carefully plan my approach to warning Taylor. I thought about how Zoe had twisted my words in the past, how she'd made me look paranoid and jealous whenever I tried to set boundaries. A direct approach could backfire spectacularly. Instead, I needed to be strategic. I needed to show Taylor Zoe's pattern rather than just telling her about it. I spent that evening sketching out a detailed plan in my hidden notebook, thinking through every possible way Zoe might react and how to counter it. This wasn't just about exposing Zoe and Amor, it was about breaking her systematic method of controlling people before she could fully sink her claws into another victim. The next morning, I deliberately left my special charcoal pencils in the art room after class. These were the ones I'd mentioned multiple times were a gift from my grandmother, precious to me both sentimentally and practically. I made sure Taylor noticed them as we were packing up, even commenting on how much they meant to me. During lunch, I casually mentioned to Lucas that I'd forgotten my grandmother's pencils, speaking just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. By afternoon art class, my pencils had mysteriously appeared in Zoe's supply case. When I spotted them, I calmly walked over. "Oh, there are my grandmother's pencils," I said clearly. "I've been looking everywhere for them." The way Zoe smoothly claimed I'd asked her to hold them for safekeeping was masterful. She didn't even blink, didn't miss a beat in her lie. But I noticed Taylor watching the interaction with newfound interest, especially when Zoe seemed strangely reluctant to actually hand the pencils back, like she'd already claimed ownership in her mind. The seed of doubt had been planted. After class, Taylor approached me cautiously, asking questions about the pencils. I was very careful not to directly accuse Zoe of anything. That would make me look petty. Instead, I simply shared that this had happened before with other items, that things had a way of disappearing around Zoe and reappearing in her possession. Taylor's expression shifted slightly. "She borrowed my favorite bracelet last week. She keeps saying she'll bring it back, but it's been 5 days and she always has some excuse." I simply nodded and said, "That's interesting," letting Taylor draw her own conclusions. The next day, Zoe was absent, probably playing hooky or avoiding something. Taylor sat with me at lunch, the first time anyone had voluntarily done so in weeks. She had more questions about my history with Zoe, and I answered honestly but cautiously, letting her ask rather than volunteering information that might seem like I was attacking Zoe. By the end of lunch, Taylor's expression had shifted from skepticism to genuine concern as she recognized Zoe's tactics in her own recent experiences. I invited her to meet Emma after school, thinking that hearing from another one of Zoe's victims might help solidify what Taylor was beginning to see for herself. Taylor agreed immediately, clearly shaken by our conversation. That afternoon, we met Emma at the local coffee shop. As Emma shared her story, I watched Taylor's face transform, recognition, then shock, then anger flashing across her features. She kept interrupting with, "She did the exact same thing to me." When Emma showed her the stolen artwork posts from a year ago, Taylor pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed us how Zoe had recently posted a poem Taylor had written, passing it off as her own creative work. The three of us spent hours comparing notes, identifying the exact same manipulation tactics Zoe had used on each of us. The pattern was undeniable. Befriend someone vulnerable, isolate them gradually, exploit them for whatever they had to offer, then destroy them when they were no longer useful or tried to set boundaries. When we finally left the coffee shop as the sun was setting, Taylor seemed both shaken and relieved. She thanked me repeatedly for helping her see what was happening, before things escalated the way they had with Emma and me.
I felt a wave of satisfaction knowing I'd broken Zoe's cycle with at least one potential victim, one person who wouldn't have to go through what I had endured. The next day, I decided to take a more aggressive approach to building my case. I needed something concrete that school administrators couldn't possibly dismiss, something so clear and obvious that Zoe couldn't talk her way out of it. I thought carefully about how to use my artwork as bait, something Zoe wouldn't be able to resist stealing. That night, I created an elaborate, detailed drawing that subtly incorporated elements symbolizing manipulation and control. Nothing obvious enough to be called harassment if anyone examined it, but deeply meaningful to anyone who knew our history. The central figure was a puppeteer with tangled strings, and if you looked closely, the puppets had expressions of anguish hidden in their features. In addition to my visible signature in the corner, I added a nearly invisible security mark, a tiny, intricate pattern that I could later prove was my deliberate artist's mark. I photographed the drawing from multiple angles with clear timestamps, saved digital copies to 3 different cloud services, and printed backup copies that I stored in a folder at home with my parents as witnesses. The next day, I deliberately left my special charcoal pencils in the art room after class. I made sure that I stepped away from my workspace several times, creating obvious opportunities for it to be taken. I casually mentioned to a classmate how proud I was of this particular piece, how much time I'd spent on it, knowing word would get back to Zoe through the school's gossip network. Sure enough, by the end of the day, the drawing had disappeared from my portfolio. I made a deliberate show of looking for it, asking several classmates if they'd seen it, expressing concern about losing something I'd worked so hard on, but I carefully avoided confronting Zoe directly. I wanted her to feel safe, to think she'd gotten away with it. We didn't have to wait long for Zoe to take the bait. That Sunday evening, she posted what she called her newest creation on Instagram. The image was unmistakably my drawing, though she'd added some digital coloring and carefully cropped out my visible signature in the corner. Most importantly, she'd completely removed my security mark, proof that she knew she was stealing and had deliberately tried to erase evidence of the original artist. Lucas, Taylor, Emma, and I immediately took screenshots from multiple accounts, documented everything with timestamps, and saved the evidence in multiple locations. Lucas suggested we hold off on confronting Zoe directly. We needed to make absolutely sure school administration saw this clear, irrefutable evidence of theft and fraudulent behavior first.
Monday morning, my parents contacted the principal and requested an urgent meeting, citing clear evidence of academic dishonesty and theft that couldn't be dismissed as a simple misunderstanding. The principal, clearly surprised by the serious tone, agreed to meet with us after school. Lucas, Emma, and Taylor all offered to come with me for support, but I decided having too many people might make it seem like we were ganging up on Zoe, which could undermine our credibility. Instead, I asked Lucas to help me organize all our documentation into a clear, chronological presentation that even the most skeptical administrator couldn't ignore. The meeting with the principal started tense but professional. My parents presented the evidence methodically: the original time-stamped photos of my drawing, Zoe's modified version posted online, detailed documentation of my security mark that had been deliberately removed, and the screenshots proving she'd claimed my work as her own. The principal seemed genuinely concerned, his expression growing more serious as he examined each piece of evidence. When my parents showed him Emma's nearly identical experience from the previous year, complete with her own stolen artwork, his jaw literally tightened. "This is very troubling," he said carefully. "I want to assure you we take academic dishonesty and harassment very seriously." Just as the meeting was wrapping up, there was a knock at the door. Ms. Rivera entered, apologizing profusely for interrupting, but explaining that she had relevant information she felt couldn't wait. She described how she'd been monitoring Zoe's artwork more closely since our previous conversation, and had noticed several other pieces that seemed suspiciously inconsistent with Zoe's usual style and skill level. Some showed techniques Zoe shouldn't have mastered yet, styles that matched other students in the class. The principal thanked her for the information and promised a thorough investigation. He asked me to keep the situation confidential while they looked into all the allegations and assured my parents that appropriate action would be taken. I left that meeting feeling cautiously hopeful for the first time in months. The next morning, I was called back to the principal's office before first period. My stomach dropped. Was Zoe somehow turning this around on me again? But when I entered, I saw Zoe was already there with her parents. She looked completely unbothered, almost bored, like this was just another tedious inconvenience in her day. Her father, I quickly learned, was a corporate lawyer. Expensive suit, confident posture, the kind of man who was used to dominating every room he entered. He immediately took control of the conversation, suggesting this was just a misunderstanding between teenagers being blown wildly out of proportion. I'm sure if we all just talked this through rationally. The principal calmly interrupted him and presented the evidence we provided. He laid out the time-stamped original artwork, explained the security mark and how it had been deliberately removed, showed Zoe's modified version posted online, and detailed the pattern of behavior spanning multiple victims. Zoe's expression remained perfectly composed as she launched into her prepared explanation. She claimed I must be copying her style, that I'd probably created my original version after seeing hers online, that I was obsessed with her and trying to frame her out of jealousy. Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. But then the principal mentioned the recording from the bathroom. Zoe's perfect composure cracked, just for a second. Her eyes widened almost imperceivably, and she glanced at her parents with something that looked like genuine fear. The principal explained that while the recording wasn't legally admissible as evidence in a court of law, it was certainly relevant for an internal school investigation into student conduct. Zoe's father immediately demanded to hear this alleged recording, his lawyer instincts kicking in. The principal hesitated for only a moment, then played it. The room went completely silent except for Zoe's voice, clear and unmistakable, laughing about how she'd made up the assault allegations, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate everyone into believing her version of events, mocking me for being so easy to destroy. Her mother gasped, audibly, one hand flying to her mouth. Her father's professional demeanor slipped entirely as he turned to stare at his daughter. "Is that really your voice?" Zoe's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. She started crying. Real tears, this time not the manipulative kind she had perfected. She claimed the recording was taken out of context, that I was just venting after I'd been so cruel to her, that everyone was ganging up on her unfairly. The principal explained that, given the overwhelming evidence, Zoe would be suspended immediately, pending a more thorough investigation into all the allegations. He strongly suggested her parents seek professional counseling for her, and made it clear that, depending on the investigation's findings, more serious consequences might follow, including possible expulsion. As Zoe and her parents left the office, her mother looked back at me with this confused, apologetic expression that actually made my heart hurt for her. She'd believed in her daughter completely, never imagining the level of manipulation and cruelty Zoe was capable of. Finding out your child is a systematic predator must be devastating. The principal asked me to stay behind briefly after they left. He apologized sincerely for not addressing the situation sooner, for not seeing the pattern until it was laid out so clearly in front of him. "We should have protected you better," he said, and I could see genuine regret in his expression. "We'll be reviewing all the evidence more thoroughly over the next few days to determine appropriate long-term consequences." He also mentioned that several other students had come forward after hearing about the investigation. More of Zoe's victims, people who'd been too afraid or ashamed to speak up before, but now felt safe enough to share their experiences. For the first time in months,
I walked through the school hallways without that constant knot of anxiety in my stomach, without looking over my shoulder, without flinching at every raised voice. News traveled fast in our school. By lunch period, everyone knew Zoe had been suspended. People who'd been avoiding me for weeks suddenly wanted to sit at my table, asking for details, hungry for the drama. I kept my responses simple and dignified. I wasn't going to turn this into some gossip spectacle. Some people apologized for believing Zoe's stories about me, their voices thick with embarrassment and regret. Others acted like they'd been on my side all along, conveniently forgetting how they'd crossed to the other side of the hallway when they saw me coming. I didn't really care either way. I was just glad the truth was finally out there. Zoe's 2-week suspension eventually turned into a strong recommendation that she transfer to another school. The administration's investigation uncovered evidence of multiple instances of academic dishonesty, harassment, theft, and systematic bullying involving not just me, Emma, and Taylor, but several other students who'd finally felt safe enough to come forward. My parents seriously considered pressing criminal charges for theft, defamation, and filing false police reports. We had consultations with our family attorney, a sharp woman named Barbara, who laid out exactly how strong our case was. But ultimately, after long family discussions, we decided against it. Barbara explained that while we had an excellent case, legal proceedings would drag on for months or even years. Every court date, every deposition, every hearing would force me to relive the trauma, to defend myself over and over again against Zoe's lawyers, to have my entire life examined and questioned. You have to ask yourself, Barbara said gently, whether legal vindication is worth the emotional cost of prolonged battle. In the end, we decided it wasn't. We'd gotten what mattered most. The truth was known, my name was cleared, and Zoe could no longer hurt anyone at our school. Dragging it through the courts would only give her continued power over my life. Instead, we focused on moving forward. The experience had fundamentally changed me in ways I was still discovering. I'd never been particularly outspoken before. I was the girl who kept her head down, who drew in the back of the class, who tried desperately to be invisible. But watching Zoe systematically target and destroy vulnerable people had awakened something fierce inside me. With Miss Rivera's encouragement, I started a small support group at school for students who had experienced bullying or toxic relationships. Taylor, Emma, and I worked together to create a safe space where people could share their experiences without judgment, where they could learn to recognize manipulation tactics, where they could find strength in knowing they weren't alone. The group grew quickly, faster than any of us expected. It turned out so many students were dealing with similar situations in silence, carrying shame and confusion about relationships that had hurt them, blaming themselves for being victims. Running the group meant becoming more visible, stepping into a leadership role I'd never imagined for myself. But I discovered I was stronger than I'd ever realized. I discovered I had a voice, and that voice could help other people find theirs. My parents noticed the transformation too. One evening over dinner, my dad set down his fork and looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what?" he said. "I'm incredibly proud of you, not just for surviving what Zoe put you through, but for how you've handled it. You didn't just survive it, you're helping other people survive it too. That takes real strength." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. For so long, I'd felt weak, stupid for falling for Zoe's manipulation, ashamed that I hadn't seen through her sooner. Hearing my father acknowledge my strength helped me start forgiving myself for being human.
During spring break, Lucas made a suggestion that ended up changing everything. "You should channel this experience into your artwork," he said. "You've always drawn what you felt. Why not draw this?" I started a new series of pieces exploring themes of manipulation, resilience, identity, and reclaiming personal power after abuse. The work was raw and honest in a way my previous art had never been. I wasn't hiding behind pretty landscapes or abstract designs anymore. I was putting my pain, my anger, my recovery right there on the canvas for everyone to see. Miss Rivera was the first person I showed the completed series to. I watched her face as she examined each piece, saw her eyes get misty as she understood the narrative flowing through them. "This is extraordinary," she said quietly. "You've taken something that tried to destroy you and transformed it into something powerful and meaningful. This is a real art, the kind that matters." She encouraged me to submit the series to a regional youth art competition. I was terrified, convinced no one would want to see such dark, personal work. But I submitted anyway, and 2 months later, I won second place. The judges' comments specifically mentioned the emotional depth and raw authenticity of the pieces. This artist isn't just skilled technically, they're brave enough to show us truth, and that's what separates good art from great art. A month before graduation, something unexpected happened. I received a message request on social media from Zoe. I stared at that notification for a solid 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over it, my heart racing. She was at her new school now, living her life somewhere else. Why was she reaching out to me? What could she possibly have to say to me? Curiosity eventually won over caution. The message said she wanted to clear the air before we all went off to college, that she had things she needed to say to me. Against my better judgment, and after a long conversation with my therapist, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown, a public place with plenty of witnesses. Lucas insisted on coming with me, sitting at a nearby table where he could see us but wouldn't be part of the conversation. Just in case, he said, and I loved him for it. When Zoe walked in, she looked different, smaller somehow, less intimidating than I remembered, like she'd shrunk in my memory, or I'd grown larger. She sat across from me and launched into what sounded like a carefully rehearsed apology, talking about therapy, personal growth, how she now understood her actions were inappropriate and harmful. I listened without interrupting, searching her face for any sign of genuine remorse, any indication that this was more than just another performance. When she finished her prepared speech, I simply asked, "Why did you do it?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her practiced words faltered, and for a long moment she just sat there in silence. Finally she spoke, and her voice was different, quieter, less certain. "Seeing your talent, your family, your potential, it made me feel insignificant," she said, staring at her hands. "You had everything I wanted, and you didn't seem to even realize it. You were just naturally good at things. It came easy to you. And I had to work so hard for everything and still fell short." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. "Breaking you was easier than improving myself," she said quietly. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even really an explanation. It was just a sad, honest truth from a damaged person who'd chosen to damage others rather than face her own inadequacy. I didn't forgive her. Some things go beyond forgiveness. The pain she had caused, the destruction she had left in her wake, the systematic way she had dismantled my life piece by piece, those things weren't just absolved with a single honest moment. But I thanked her for her honesty. I wished her well with her therapy, genuinely hoping she'd get the help she needed so she'd never do this to anyone else, and then I walked away. As I left that coffee shop with Lucas falling into step beside me, I realized I felt nothing but pity for her. This girl who had once seemed so powerful, so threatening, so completely in control, she just looked like a troubled, insecure person who couldn't stand seeing light in others because her own inner world was so dark. "You okay?" Lucas asked me as we walked to his car. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I really am." On graduation day, I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, with my head held high. My parents cheered embarrassingly loud from the audience. My friends waited with hugs and congratulations at the bottom of the steps. And Miss Rivera caught my eye from where she stood with the other teachers and gave me a proud smile. In the end, her carefully orchestrated scheme had failed spectacularly. She had tried to write my story as a tragedy, but I'd taken the pen from her hands and turned it into something else entirely. A story about resilience, about finding your voice, about refusing to let someone else's cruelty define who you become. I wasn't her victim anymore. I wasn't her masterpiece. I was my own creation, built from broken pieces she had left behind, transformed into something she could never touch or diminish again.